Chapter 22, Part 2 of A Sportsman's Sketches. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by tovarisch. A Sportsman's Sketches by Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance GARNETT. The End of TCHERTOP-HANOV. 9. A year passed. A whole year no news had come of Panteley Yeremeyevich. The cook was dead. Perfishka himself made up his mind to abandon the house and go off to town, where he was constantly being persuaded to come by his cousin, apprenticed to a barber, when suddenly a rumour was set afloat that his master was coming back. The parish deacon got a letter from Panteley Yeremeyevich himself, in which he informed him of his intention of arriving at Bessonova and asked him to prepare his servant to be ready for his immediate return. These words Perfishka understood to mean that he was to sweep up the place a bit. He did not, however, put much confidence in the news. He was convinced, though, that the deacon had spoken the truth, when a few days later Panteley Yeremeyevich in person appeared in the courtyard riding on Malekadel. Perfishka rushed up to his master and, holding the stirrup, would have helped him to dismount, but the latter got off alone, and with a triumphant glance about him cried in a loud voice, "I said I would find Malekadel, and I have found him in spite of my enemies and of fate itself." Perfishka went up to kiss his hand, but TCHERTOP-HANOV paid no attention to his servant's devotion. Leading Malekadel after him by the rein, he went with long strides towards the stable. Perfishka looked more intently at his master, and his heart sank. Oh, how thin and old he's grown in a year, and what a stern, grim face! One would have thought Panteley Yeremeyevich would have been rejoicing that he had gained his end, and he was rejoicing, certainly, and yet Perfishka's heart sank. He even felt a sort of dread. TCHERTOP-HANOV put the horse in its old place, gave him a light pat on the back, and said, "There, now you're at home again, and mind what you're about." The same day he hired a freedman out of work as watchman, established himself again in his rooms, and began living as before. Not altogether as before, however, but of that later. The day after his return, Panteley Yeremeyevich called Perfishka in to him, and for want of any one else to talk to, began telling him, keeping up, of course, his sense of his own dignity and his bass voice, how he had succeeded in finding Malekadel. TCHERTOP-HANOV sat facing the window while he told his story and smoked a pipe with a long tube, while Perfishka stood in the doorway, his hands behind his back, and respectfully contemplating the back of his master's head, heard him relate how, after many fruitless efforts and idle expeditions, Panteley Yeremeyevich had at last come to the fair at Ramyon by himself, without the Jew labour, who, through weakness of character, had not persevered, but had deserted him. How, on the 5th day, when he was on the point of leaving, he walked for the last time along the rows of carts, and all at once he saw between 3 other horses fastened to the railings, he saw Malekadel. How he knew him at once, and how Malekadel knew him too, and began neighing and dragging at his tether, and scraping the earth with his hoof. "And he was not with the Cossack," TCHERTOP-HANOV went on, still not turning his head, and in the same bass voice, "but with a gypsy horse dealer. I, of course, at once took hold of my horse and tried to get him away by force, but the brute of a gypsy started yelling as if he'd been scalded all over the market, and began swearing he'd bought the horse off another gypsy, and wanted to bring witnesses to prove it. I spat and paid him the money, damn the fellow. All I cared for was that I had found my favourite, and had got back my peace of mind. Moreover, in the Karachevsky district, I took a man for the Cossack. I took the Jew labor's word for it that he was my thief, and smashed his face for him. but the Cossack turned out to be a priest's son and got damages out of me, 120 rubles. Well, money's a thing one may get again, but the great thing is I've Malek Adel back again. I'm happy now. I'm going to enjoy myself in peace. And I've one instruction to give you, Perfishka. If ever you, which God forbid, catch sight of the Cossack in this neighborhood, run the very minute without saying a word, and bring me my gun, and I shall know what to do.
This was what Panteley Yeremyevich said to Perfishka. This was how his tongue spoke. But at heart he was not so completely at peace as he declared. Alas, in his heart of hearts he was not perfectly convinced that the horse he had brought back was really Malek Adel. 10. Troubled times followed for Panteley Yeremyevich. Peace was just the last thing he enjoyed. He had some happy days, it is true. The doubt stirring within him would seem to him all nonsense. He would drive away the ridiculous idea like a persistent fly, and even laugh at himself, but he had bad days too. The importunate thought began again stealthily gnawing and tearing at his heart, like a mouse under the floor, and he existed in secret torture. On the memorable day when he found Malek Adel, Chertop-HANOV had felt nothing but rapturous bliss. But the next morning, when in a low-pitched shed of the inn he began saddling his recovered joy, beside whom he had spent the whole night, he felt for the first time a certain secret pang. He only shook his head, but the seed was sown. During the homeward journey, it lasted a whole week, doubts seldom arose in him. They grew stronger and more distinct directly he was back at Bessonova, directly he was home again in the place where the old authentic Malek Adel had lived. On the road home he had ridden at a quiet swinging pace, looking in all directions, smoking a short pipe, and not reflecting at all, except at times the thought struck him: "When the Chertop-HANOVs want a thing, they get it, you bet." And he smiled to himself, but on his return home it was a very different state of things. All this, however, he kept to himself. Vanity alone would have prevented him from giving utterance to his inner dread. He would have torn anyone to pieces who had dropped the most distant hint that the new Malek Adel was possibly not the old one. He accepted congratulations on his successful recovery of his horse, from the few persons whom he happened to meet, but he did not seek such congratulations. He avoided all contact with people more than ever, a bad sign. He was almost always putting Malek Adel through examinations, if one may use the expression. He would ride him out to some point at a little distance in the open country and put him to the proof, or would go stealthily into the stable, lock the door after him, and standing right before the horse's head, look into his eyes and ask him in a whisper, "Is it you? Is it you? You?" Or else stare at him silently and intently for hours together, and then mutter, brightening up, "Yes, it's he, of course it's he." Or else go out with a puzzled, even confused look on his face. Chertop-HANOV was not so much confused by the physical differences between this Malek Adel and that one, though there were a few such differences. That one's tail and mane were a little thinner, and his ears more pointed, and his pasterns shorter, and his eyes brighter, but all that might be only fancy. What confounded Chertop-HANOV most were, so to say, the moral differences. The habits of that one had been different. All his ways were not the same. For instance, that Malek Adel had looked round and given a faint neigh every time Chertop-HANOV went into the stable, while this one went on munching hay as though nothing had happened, or dozed with his head bent. Both of them stood still when their master leaped out of the saddle, but that one came at once at his voice when he was called, while this one stood stock still. That one galloped as fast, but with higher and longer bounds. This one went with a freer step and at a more jolting trot, and at times wriggled with his shoes, that is, knocked the back one against the front one. That one had never done anything so disgraceful, God forbid. This one, it struck Chertop-HANOV, kept twitching his ears in such a stupid way, while with that one it was quite the contrary. He used to lay one ear back and hold it so as though on the alert for his master. That one, directly he saw that it was dirty about him, would at once knock on the partition of his box with his hind leg. But this one did not care if the dung was heaped up to his belly. That one, if for instance he were set facing the wind, would take deep breaths and shake himself. This one simply snorted. That one was put out by the rain. This one cared nothing for it. This was a coarser beast, coarser, and there wasn't the gentleness in it, and hard in the mouth it was, no denying it. That horse was a darling, but this was what Chertop-HANOV sometimes thought, and very bitter were such thoughts to him. At other times he would set his horse at full gallop over some newly ploughed field, or would make him leap down to the very bottom of a hollow ravine, and leap out again at the very steepest point, and his heart would throb with rapture, a loud whoop would break from his lips, and he would know for certain that it was the real, authentic Malekadel he had under him. For what other horse could do what this one was doing? However, there were sometimes shortcomings and misfortunes even here. The prolonged search for Malekadel had cost Chertop-HANOV a great deal of money. He did not even dream of Kostroma hounds now, and rode about the neighborhood in solitude as before. So one morning, 4 miles from Bessonova, Chertop-HANOV chanced to come upon the same prince's hunting party, before whom he had cut such a triumphant figure a year and a half before. And as fate would have it, just as on that day, a hare must go leaping out from the hedge before the dogs down the hillside. Tally-ho! Tally-ho! All the hunt fairly flew after it, and Chertop-HANOV flew along too, but not with the rest of the party, but 200 paces to one side of it, just as he had done the time before. A huge watercourse ran zigzagging across the hillside, and as it rose higher and higher, got gradually narrower, cutting off Chertop-HANOV's path. At the point where he had to jump it, and where 18 months before he actually had jumped it, it was 8 feet wide and 14 feet deep. In anticipation of a triumph repeated in such a delightful way, Chertop-HANOV chuckled exultantly, cracked his riding whip. The hunting party were galloping too, their eyes fixed on the daring rider. His horse whizzed along like a bullet, and now the watercourse was just under his nose, now, at one leap, as then. But Malekadel pulled up sharply, wheeled to the left, and in spite of Chertop-HANOV's tugging him to the edge, to the watercourse, he galloped along beside the ravine. He was afraid then, did not trust himself. Then Chertop-HANOV, burning with shame and wrath, almost in tears, dropped the reins and set the horse going straight forward down the hill, away from the hunting party, if only not to hear them jeering at him, to escape as soon as might be from their damnable eyes. Covered with foam, his sides lashed unmercifully, Malekadel galloped home, and Chertop-HANOV at once locked himself into his room. "No, it's not he. It's not my darling. He would have broken his neck before he would have betrayed me." 11. What finally did for, as they say, Chertop-HANOV was the following circumstance. One day he sauntered, riding on Malekadel, about the backyards of the priest's quarters, round about the church of the parish in which is Bessonova. Huddled up, with his Cossack fur cap pulled down over his eyes, and his hands hanging loose on the saddle bow. He jogged slowly on, a vague discontent in his heart. Suddenly someone called him. He stopped his horse, raised his head, and saw his correspondent, the deacon. With a brown three-cornered hat on his brown hair, which was plaited in a pigtail, attired in a yellowish nankin long coat, girt much below the waist by a strip of blue stuff, the servant of the altar had come out into his back garden, and catching sight of Panteley Yeremyevitch, he thought it his duty to pay his respects to him, and to take the opportunity of doing so to ask him a question about something. Without some such hidden motive, as we know, ecclesiastical persons do not venture to address temporal ones. But Chertop-HANOV was in no mood for the deacon. He barely responded to his bow, and muttering something between his teeth, he was already cracking his whip when— "What a magnificent horse you have!" the deacon made haste to add. "And really you can take credit to yourself for it. Truly you're a man of amazing cleverness, simply a lion indeed." His reverence the deacon prided himself on his fluency, which was a great source of vexation to his reverence the priest, to whom the gift of words had not been vouchsafed. Even vodka did not loosen his tongue. "After losing one animal by the cunning of evil men," continued the deacon, "you did not lose courage in repining, but, on the other hand, trusting the more confidently in divine providence, procured yourself another, in no wise inferior, but even one may say superior, since—"
"What nonsense are you talking?"
Chertop-HANOV interrupted gloomily.
"What other horse do you mean? This is the same one. This is Malek-Adel. I found him. The fellow's raving—"
Hey, responded the deacon emphatically, with a sort of drawl, drumming with his fingers in his beard, and eyeing Chertop-HANOV with his bright, eager eyes. "How is that, sir? Your horse, God help my memory, was stolen a fortnight before intercession last year, and now we're near the end of November."
"Well, what of that?"
"Why, it follows that more than a year's gone by since then, and your horse was a dapple grey then, just as it is now. In fact, it seems even darker. How is that? Grey horses get a great deal lighter in color in a year." Chertop-HANOV started, as though someone had driven a dagger into his heart. It was true. The grey color did change. How was it such a simple reflection had never occurred to him?
"You damn pigtail, get out!"
he yelled suddenly, his eyes flashing with fury, and instantaneously he disappeared out of the sight of the amazed deacon. Well, everything was over. Now at last everything was really over, everything was shattered, the last card trumped. Everything crumbled away at once before that word lighter. Grey horses get lighter in color.
"Gallop, gallop on, accursed brute! You can never gallop away from that word!"
Chertop-HANOV flew home and again locked himself up. 12. That this worthless jade was not Malek-Adel, that between him and Malek-Adel there was not the smallest resemblance, that any man of the slightest sense would have seen this from the first minute, that he, Chertop-HANOV, had been taken in the vulgarest way, no, that he purposely, of set intent, tricked himself, blinded his own eyes, of all this he had not now the faintest doubt. Chertop-HANOV walked up and down in his room, turning monotonously on his heels at each wall, like a beast in a cage. His vanity suffered intolerably. But he was not only tortured by the sting of wounded vanity, he was overwhelmed by despair, stifled by rage, and burning with the thirst for revenge. But rage against whom? On whom was he to be revenged? On the Jew? Yav? Masha? The deacon? The Cossack thief? All his neighbors? The whole world? Himself? His brain was giving way. The last card was trumped. That simile gratified him. and he was again the most worthless, the most contemptible of men, a common laughing-stock, a motley fool, a damned idiot, an object for gibes, to a deacon! He fancied he pictured vividly how the loathsome pig-tailed priest would tell the story of the grey horse and the foolish gentleman. Oh, damn! In vain Chertop-HANOV tried to check his rising passion, in vain he tried to assure himself that this horse, though not Malek Adel, was still a good horse, and might be of service to him for many years to come. He put this thought away from him on the spot with fury, as though there were contained in it a new insult to that Malek Adel whom he considered he had wronged so already. Yes, indeed, this jade, this carrion, he, like a blind idiot, had put on a level with him, Malek Adel. And as to the service the jade could be to him, as though he would ever deign to get astride of him, never, on no consideration. He would sell him to a Tartar for dog's meat. It deserved no better end. Yes, that would be best. For more than 2 hours Chertop-HANOV wandered up and down his room. "Purfishka!" he called peremptorily all of a sudden. "Run this minute to the tavern! Fetch a gallon of vodka, do you hear? A gallon! And look sharp! I want the vodka here this very second on the table!" The vodka was not long in making its appearance on Pantelei Iremeitch's table, and he began drinking. 13. If anyone had looked at Chertop-HANOV then, if anyone could have been a witness of the sullen exasperation with which he drained glass after glass, he would inevitably have felt an involuntary shudder of fear. The night came on, the tallow candle burnt dimly on the table. Chertop-HANOV ceased wandering from corner to corner. He sat all flushed, with dull eyes, which he dropped at one time on the floor, at another fixed obstinately on the dark window. He got up, poured out some vodka, drank it off, sat down again. Again he fixed his eyes on one point, and did not stir. Only his breathing grew quicker and his face still more flushed. It seemed as though some resolution were ripening within him, which he was himself ashamed of, but which he was gradually getting used to. One single thought kept obstinately and undeviatingly moving up closer and closer. One single image stood out more and more distinctly, and under the burning weight of heavy drunkenness, the angry irritation was replaced by a feeling of ferocity in his heart, and a vindictive smile appeared on his lips. "Yes, the time has come," he declared in a matter-of-fact, almost weary tone. "I must get to work." He drank off the last glass of vodka, took from over his bed the pistol, the very pistol from which he had shot at Masha, loaded it, put some cartridges in his pocket, to be ready for anything, and went round to the stables. The watchman ran up to him when he began to open the door, but he shouted at him, "It's I! Are you blind? Get out!" The watchman moved a little aside. "Get out and go to bed!" Chertop-HANOV shouted at him again. "There is nothing for you to guard here. A mighty wonder, a treasure indeed to watch over." He went into the stable. Malek Adel, the spurious Malek Adel, was lying on his litter. Chertop-HANOV gave him a kick, saying, "Get up, you brute!" Then he unhooked a halter from a nail, took off the horse cloth, and flung it on the ground, and roughly turning the submissive horse round in the box, led it out into the courtyard, and from the yard into the open country, to the great amazement of the watchman, who could not make out at all where the master was going off to by night, leading an unharnessed horse. He was, of course, afraid to question him, and only followed him with his eyes, till he disappeared at the bend in the road leading to a neighbouring wood. 14. Chertop-HANOV walked with long strides, not stopping nor looking round. Malek Adel, we will call him by that name to the end, followed him meekly. It was a rather clear night. Chertop-HANOV could make out the jagged outline of the forest, which formed a black mass in front of him. When he got into the chill night air, he would certainly have thrown off the intoxication of the vodka he had drunk, if it had not been for another stronger intoxication which completely overmastered him. His head was heavy, his blood pulsed in thuds in his throat and ears, but he went on steadily and knew where he was going. He had made up his mind to kill Malek Adel. He had thought of nothing else the whole day. Now he had made up his mind. He went out to do this thing not only calmly but confidently, unhesitatingly, as a man going about something from a sense of duty. This job seemed a very simple thing to him. In making an end of the impostor, he was quits with everyone at once. He punished himself for his stupidity and made expiation to his real darling and showed the whole world (Chertop-HANOV worried himself a great deal about the whole world) that he was not to be trifled with. And above all he was making an end of himself too with the impostor, for what had he to live for now? How all this took shape in his brain, and why it seemed to him so simple, it is not easy to explain, though not altogether impossible. Stung to the quick, solitary, without a human soul near to him, without a half-penny, and with his blood on fire with vodka, he was in a state bordering on madness, and there is no doubt that even in the absurdest freaks of mad people there is, to their eyes, a sort of logic and even justice. Of his justice Chertop-HANOV was at any rate fully persuaded. He did not hesitate, he made haste to carry out sentence on the guilty without giving himself any clear definition of whom he meant by that term. To tell the truth, he reflected very little on what he was about to do. I must make an end, was what he kept stupidly and severely repeating to himself. I must make an end. And the guilty one followed in a submissive trot behind his back. But there was no pity for him in Chertop-HANOV's heart. 15. Not far from the forest to which he was leading his horse, there stretched a small ravine, half overgrown with young oak bushes. Chertop-HANOV went down into it. Malek Adel stumbled and almost fell on him.
"So you would crush me, would you, you damned brute?"
shouted Chertop-HANOV, and as though in self-defense, he pulled the pistol out of his pocket. He no longer felt furious exasperation, but that special numbness of the senses, which they say comes over a man before the perpetration of a crime. But his own voice terrified him. It sounded so wild and strange under the cover of dark branches in the close decaying dampness of the forest ravine. Moreover, in response to his exclamation, some great bird suddenly fluttered in a treetop above his head. Chertop-HANOV shuddered. He had, as it were, roused a witness to his act, and where? In that silent place where he should not have met a living creature.
"Away with you, devil! To the four winds of heaven!"
he muttered, and letting go Malek Adel's rein, he gave him a violent blow on the shoulder with the butt end of the pistol. Malek Adel promptly turned back, clambered out of the ravine, and ran away. But the thud of his hoofs was not long audible. The rising wind confused and blended all sounds together. Chertop-HANOV too slowly clambered out of the ravine, reached the forest, and made his way along the road homewards. He was ill at ease with himself. The weight he had felt in his head and his heart had spread over all his limbs. He walked angry, gloomy, dissatisfied, hungry, as though someone had insulted him, snatched his prey, his food from him. The suicide, baffled in his intent, must know such sensations. Suddenly something poked him behind between his shoulder blades. He looked round. Malek Adel was standing in the middle of the road. He had walked after his master. He touched him with his nose to announce himself.
"Ah!"
shouted Chertop-HANOV.
"Of yourself!
Of yourself you have come to your death, so there!" In the twinkling of an eye he had snatched out his pistol, drawn the trigger, turned the muzzle on Malek Adele's brow, fired. The poor horse sprang aside, rose on its haunches, bounded 10 paces away, and suddenly fell heavily and gasped as it writhed upon the ground. Chertop-HANOV put his 2 hands over his ears and ran away. His knees were shaking under him. His drunkenness and revenge and blind self-confidence all had flown at once. There was left nothing but a sense of shame and loathing, and the consciousness, unmistakable, that this time he had put an end to himself too. 16. 6 weeks later, the groom Perfishka thought it his duty to stop the commissioner of police as he happened to be passing Bessonova.
What do you want?"
inquired the guardian of order. "If you please, your excellency, come into our house," answered the groom with a low bow. "Panteley Yeremeitch, I fancy, is about to die, so that I am afraid of getting into trouble."
"What? Die?"
queried the commissioner. "Yes, sir. First his honor drank vodka every day, and now he's taken to his bed and got very thin. I fancy his honor does not understand anything now. He's lost his tongue completely." The commissioner got out of his trap.
"Have you sent for the priest at least? Has your master been confessed? Taken the sacrament?"
"No, sir." The commissioner frowned.
"How is that, my boy? How can that be, hey? Don't you know that for that you're liable to have to answer heavily, hey?"
"Indeed, and I did ask him the day before yesterday, and yesterday again," protested the intimidated groom. "Wouldn't you, Panteley Yeremeitch, says I, let me run for the priest, sir?"
"You hold your tongue, idiot," says he. "Mind your own business."
But today, when I began to address him, his honor only looked at me and twitched his moustache.
"And has he been drinking a great deal of vodka?" inquired the commissioner.
"Rather. But if you would be so good, your honor, come into his room."
"Well, lead the way,"
grumbled the commissioner, and he followed Perfishka. An astounding sight was in store for him. In a damp, dark back room, on a wretched bedstead covered with a horse cloth, with a rough felt cloak for a pillow, lay Chertop-HANOV. He was not pale now, but yellowish green like a corpse, with sunken eyes under leaden lids and a sharp, pinched nose, still reddish, above his dishevelled whiskers. He lay dressed in his invariable Caucasian coat, with the cartridge pockets on the breast, and blue Circassian trousers. A Cossack cap with a crimson crown covered his forehead to his very eyebrows. In one hand Chertop-HANOV held his hunting whip, in the other an embroidered tobacco pouch, Masha's last gift to him. On a table near the bed stood an empty spirit bottle, and at the head of the bed were 2 watercolor sketches pinned to the wall. One represented, as far as could be made out, a fat man with a guitar in his hand, probably Niederpüskin. The other portrayed a horseman galloping at full speed. The horse was like those fabulous animals which are sketched by children on walls and fences, but the carefully washed-in dappling of the horse's grey coat, and the cartridge pocket on the rider's breast, the pointed toes of his boots, and the immense moustaches left no room for doubt. This sketch was meant to represent Panteley Yeremeitch riding on Malek Adel. The astonished commissioner of police did not know how to proceed. The silence of death reigned in the room.
"Why, he's dead already,"
he thought, and raising his voice, he said,
"Panteley Yeremeitch, Panteley Yeremeitch."
Then something extraordinary occurred. Chertop-HANOV's eyelids slowly opened, the eyes fast growing dim, moved first from right to left, then from left to right, rested on the commissioner, saw him. Something gleamed in their dull whites, the semblance of a flash came back to them, The blue lips were gradually unglued, and a hoarse, almost sepulchral voice was heard.
Panteleie image of the ancient hereditary nobility is dying. Who can hinder him? He owes no man anything, asks nothing from anyone. Leave him, people. Go.
The hand holding the whip tried to lift it. In vain. The lips cleaved together again, the eyes closed, and as before Chertop-HANOV lay on his comfortless bed, flat as an empty sack, and his feet close together.
"Let me know when he dies,"
the commissioner whispered to Perfishka as he went out of the room.
"And I suppose you can send for the priest now. You must observe due order. Give him extreme unction."
Perfishka went the same day for the priest, and the following morning he had to let the commissioner know Panteleie Image had died in the night. When they buried him, 2 men followed his coffin, the groom Perfishka and Moshe Leiba. The news of Chertop-HANOV's death had somehow reached the Jew, and he did not fail to pay his last act of respect to his benefactor. End of The End of Chertop-HANOV. Chapter 23 of A Sportsman's Sketches. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by tovarisch. A Sportsman's Sketches by Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance GARNETT. A Living Relic. O native land of long suffering, land of the Russian people. Tchutchev. A French proverb says that a dry fisherman and a wet hunter are a sorry sight. Never having had any taste for fishing, I cannot decide what are the fisherman's feelings in fine bright weather, and how far in bad weather the pleasure derived from the abundance of fish compensates for the unpleasantness of being wet. But for the sportsman, rain is a real calamity. It was to just this calamity that Yermolai and I were exposed on one of our expeditions after grouse in the Belyovsky district. The rain never ceased from early morning. What didn't we do to escape it? We put mackintosh capes almost right over our heads and stood under the trees to avoid the raindrops. The waterproof capes, to say nothing of their hindering our shooting, let the water through in the most shameless fashion. And under the trees, though at first certainly the rain did not reach us, afterwards the water collected on the leaves suddenly rushed through, every branch dripped on us like a waterspout, a chill stream made its way under our neckties and trickled down our spines. This was quite unpleasant, as Yermolai expressed it. "No, Pyotr Petrovitch," he cried at last, "we can't go on like this. There is no shooting today. The dog's scent is drowned. The guns miss fire. Pooh, what a mess!" "What's to be done?" I queried. "Well, let's go to Alexeyevka. You don't know it, perhaps. There is a settlement of that name belonging to your mother. It's 7 miles from here. We'll stay the night there, and tomorrow—" "Come back here?" "No, not here. I know of some places beyond Alexeyevka, ever so much better than here for grouse." I did not proceed to question my faithful companion why he had not taken me to those parts before, and the same day we made our way to my mother's peasant settlement, the existence of which I must confess I had not even suspected up till then. At this settlement, it turned out, there was a little lodge. It was very old, but, as it had not been inhabited, it was clean. I passed a fairly tranquil night in it. The next day I woke up very early. The sun had only just risen. There was not a single cloud in the sky, everything around shone with a double brilliance, the brightness of the fresh morning rays and of yesterday's downpour. While they were harnessing me a cart, I went for a stroll about a small orchard, now neglected and run wild, which enclosed the little lodge on all sides with its fragrant sappy growth. Ah, how sweet it was in the open air, under the bright sky, where the larks were trilling, whence their bell-like notes rained down like silvery beads. On their wings doubtless they had carried off drops of dew, and their songs seemed steeped in dew. I took my cap off my head and drew a glad deep breath. On the slope of a shallow ravine close to the hedge could be seen a beehive. A narrow path led to it, winding like a snake between dense walls of high grass and nettles, above which struggled up, God knows whence brought, the pointed stalks of dark green hemp. I turned along this path. I reached the beehive. Beside it stood a little wattled shanty, where they put the beehives for the winter. I peeped into the half-opened door. It was dark, still, dry within. There was a scent of mint and balm. In the corner were some trestles fitted together, and on them, covered with a quilt, a little figure of some sort. I was walking away. "Master, master, Pyotr Petrovitch!" I heard a voice, faint, slow, and hoarse, like the whispering of marsh rushes. I stopped. "Pyotr Petrovitch, come in, please," the voice repeated. It came from the corner where were the trestles I had noticed. I drew near and was struck dumb with amazement. Before me lay a living human being. But what sort of creature was it? A head utterly withered, of a uniform coppery hue, like some very ancient holy picture, yellow with age, a sharp nose like a keen-edged knife. The lips could barely be seen, only the teeth flashed white and the eyes. And from under the kerchief some thin wisps of yellow hair straggled on to the forehead. At the chin, where the quilt was folded, two tiny hands of the same coppery hue were moving, the fingers slowly twitching like little sticks. I looked more intently. The face, far from being ugly, was positively beautiful, but strange and dreadful, and the face seemed the more dreadful to me that on it, on its metallic cheeks, I saw, struggling and unable to form itself, a smile. "You don't recognize me, master?" whispered the voice again. It seemed to be breathed from the almost unmoving lips. "And indeed, how would you? I'm Lukerya. Do you remember who used to lead the dance at your mother's at Spasskoye? Do you remember? I used to be leader of the choir too." "Lukerya!" I cried. "Is it you? Can it be?" "Yes, it's I, master. I, Lukerya." I did not know what to say, and gazed in stupefaction at the dark, motionless face, with the clear, death-like eyes fastened upon me. Was it possible? This mummy Lukerya, the greatest beauty in all our household? That tall, plump, pink and white, singing, laughing, dancing creature? Lukerya, our smart Lukerya, whom all our lads were courting, for whom I heaved some secret sighs, I, a boy of 16. "Mercy, Lukerya," I said at last, "what is it has happened to you?" "Oh, such a misfortune befell me. But don't mind me, sir. Don't let my trouble revolt you. Sit there on that little tub, a little nearer, or you won't be able to hear me. I've not much of a voice nowadays. Well, I am glad to see you. What brought you to Alexeyevka?" Lukerya spoke very softly and feebly, but without pausing. "Yermolai, the huntsman, brought me here. But you tell me—" "Tell you about my trouble? Certainly, sir. It happened to me a long while ago now, 6 or 7 years. I had only just been betrothed then to Vasily Polyakov. Do you remember? Such a fine-looking fellow he was, with curly hair. He waited at table at your mother's. But you weren't in the country then. You had gone away to Moscow to your studies. We were very much in love, Vasily and me. I could never get him out of my head. And it was in the spring it all happened. Well, one night, not long before sunrise, I couldn't sleep. A nightingale in the garden was singing so wonderfully sweet. I could not help getting up and going out onto the steps to listen. It trilled and trilled, and all at once I fancied someone called me. It seemed like Vasya's voice, so softly, 'Lusha.' I looked round, and being half asleep, I suppose, I missed my footing and fell straight down from the top step and flop on to the ground. And I thought I wasn't much hurt, for I got up directly and went back to my room. Only it seemed something inside me, in my body, was broken. Let me get my breath. Half a minute, sir."
Lukerya ceased, and I looked at her with surprise. What surprised me particularly was that she told her story almost cheerfully, without sighs and groans, not complaining nor asking for sympathy.
"Ever since that happened," Lukerya went on, "I began to pine away and get thin. My skin got dark. Walking was difficult for me, and then I lost the use of my legs altogether. I couldn't stand or sit. I had to lie down all the time. And I didn't care to eat or drink. I got worse and worse. Your mamma, in the kindness of her heart, made me see doctors and sent me to a hospital, but there was no curing me, and not one doctor could even say what my illness was. What didn't they do to me? They burnt my spine with hot irons. They put me in lumps of ice, and it was all no good. I got quite numb in the end. So the gentleman decided it was no use doctoring me any more, and there was no sense in keeping cripples up at the great house. Well, and so they sent me here, because I've relations here. So here I live, as you see."
Lukerya was silent again, and again she tried to smile. "But this is awful, your position!" I cried, and not knowing how to go on, I asked, "And what of Vasily Polyakov?" A most stupid question it was. Lukerya turned her eyes a little away.
"What of Polyakov? He grieved for a bit, and he is married to another, a girl from Glinoye. Do you know Glinoye? It's not far from us. Her name's Agrafena. He loved me dearly, but you see he's a young man. He couldn't stay a bachelor. And what sort of a helpmeet could I be? The wife he found for himself is a good, sweet woman, and they have children. He lives here. He's a clerk at a neighbor's. Your mamma let him go off with a passport, and he's doing very well, praise God."
"And so you go on lying here all the time?" I asked again.
"Yes, sir. I've been lying here 7 years. In the summer-time I lie here in this shanty, and when it gets cold they move me out into the bath-house. I lie there."
"Oh, who waits on you? Does anyone look after you?"
Oh, there are kind folks here as everywhere. They don't desert me. Yes, they see to me a little. As to food, I eat nothing to speak of, but water is here in the pitcher. It's always kept full of pure spring water. I can reach to the pitcher myself. I've one arm still of use. There's a little girl here, an orphan. Now and then she comes to see me, the kind child. She was here just now. You didn't meet her? Such a pretty, fair little thing. She brings me flowers. We've some in the garden. There were some, but they've all disappeared. But, you know, wildflowers too are nice. They smell even sweeter than garden flowers. Lilies of the valley, now. What could be sweeter?
And aren't you dull and miserable, my poor Lukerya?
Why, what is one to do? I wouldn't tell a lie about it. At first it was very wearisome, but later on I got used to it. I got more patient. It was nothing. There are others worse off still.
How do you mean?
Why, some haven't a roof to shelter them, and there are some blind or deaf, while I, thank God, have splendid sight and hear everything, everything. If a mole burrows in the ground, I hear even that, and I can smell every scent, even the faintest, when the buckwheat comes into flower in the meadow, or the lime tree in the garden. I don't need to be told of it even. I'm the first to know directly. Anyway, if there is the least bit of a wind blowing from that quarter, no, he who stirs God's wrath is far worse off than me. Look at this again. Anyone in health may easily fall into sin, but I'm cut off even from sin. The other day, Father Alexei, the priest, came to give me the sacrament, and he says, "There's no need," says he, "to confess you. You can't fall into sin in your condition, can you?" But I said to him, "How about sinning in thought, Father?" "Ah, well," says he, and he laughed himself, "that's no great sin." But I fancy I am no great sinner even in that way, in thought,
Lukerya went on.
For I've trained myself not to think, and above all, not to remember. The time goes faster.
I must own I was astonished. You're always alone, Lukerya. How can you prevent the thoughts from coming into your head? Or are you constantly asleep?
Oh, no, sir. I can't always sleep. Though I've no great pain, still I've an ache there right inside and in my bones too. It won't let me sleep as I ought. No. But there I lie by myself. I lie here and don't think. I feel that I am alive. I breathe and I put myself all into that. I look and listen. The bees buzz and hum in the hive. A dove sits on the roof and coos. A hen comes along with her chickens to pick up crumbs. Or a sparrow flies in, or a butterfly. That's a great treat for me. Last year some swallows even built a nest over there in the corner and brought up their little ones. Oh, how interesting it was. One would fly to the nest, press close, feed a young one, and off again. Look again, the other would be in her place already. Sometimes it wouldn't fly in, but only fly past the open door, and the little ones would begin to squeak and open their beaks directly. I was hoping for them back again the next year, but they say a sportsman here shot them with his gun. And what could he gain by it? It's hardly bigger, the swallow, than a beetle. What wicked men you are, you sportsmen.
I don't shoot swallows, I hastened to remark.
And once,
Lukerya began again.
It was comical, really. A hare ran in. It did, really. The hounds, I suppose, were after it. Anyway, it seemed to tumble straight in at the door. It squatted quite near me and sat so a long while. It kept sniffing with its nose and twitching its whiskers like a regular officer. And it looked at me. It understood, to be sure, that I was no danger to it. At last it got up, went hop, hop to the door, looked round in the doorway, and what did it look like? Such a funny fellow it was.
Lukerya glanced at me as much as to say, "Wasn't it funny?" To satisfy her, I laughed. She moistened her parched lips. "Well, in the winter, of course, I'm worse off because it's dark.
To burn a candle would be a pity. And what would be the use? I can read, to be sure, and was always fond of reading, but what could I read? There are no books of any kind, and even if there were, how could I hold a book? Father Alexei brought me a calendar to entertain me, but he saw it was no good, so he took and carried it away again. But even though it's dark, there's always something to listen to. A cricket chirps, or a mouse begins scratching somewhere. That's when it's a good thing not to think. And I repeat the prayers, too,"
Lukerya went on after taking breath a little.
"Only I don't know many of them, the prayers I mean. And besides, why should I weary the Lord God? What can I ask him for? He knows better than I what I need. He has laid a cross upon me. That means that he loves me. So we are commanded to understand. I repeat the Lord's Prayer, the hymn to the Virgin, the supplication of all the afflicted, and I lie still again without any thought at all, and am all right."
2 minutes passed by. I did not break the silence. I did not stir on the narrow tub which served me as a seat. The cruel, stony stillness of the living, unlucky creature lying before me communicated itself to me. I, too, turned, as it were, numb. "Listen, Lukerya," I began at last. "Listen to the suggestion I am going to make to you. Would you like me to arrange for them to take you to a hospital, a good hospital in the town? Who knows, perhaps you might yet be cured. Anyway, you would not be alone?" Lukerya's eyebrows fluttered faintly.
"Oh, no, sir," she answered in a troubled whisper. "Don't move me into a hospital. Don't touch me. I shall only have more agony to bear there. How could they cure me now? Why, there was a doctor came here once. He wanted to examine me. I begged him for Christ's sake not to disturb me. It was no use. He began turning me over, pounding my hands and legs, and pulling me about. He said, 'I am doing this for science. I am a servant of science, a scientific man. And you,' he said, 'really oughtn't to oppose me, because I have a medal given me for my labors, and it's for you simpletons I am toiling.' He mauled me about, told me the name of my disease, some wonderful long name, and with that he went away, and all my poor bones ached for a week after. You say I'm all alone, always alone. Oh, no, I'm not always. They come to see me. I'm quiet. I don't bother them. The peasant girls come in and chat a bit. A pilgrim woman will wander in and tell me tales of Jerusalem, of Kiev, of the holy towns. And I'm not afraid of being alone, indeed. It's better. Aye, aye. Master, don't touch me. Don't take me to the hospital. Thank you. You are kind. Only don't touch me. There's a dear."
"Well, as you like, Lukerya. You know I only suggested it for your good."
"I know, master, that it was for my good. But, master dear, who can help another? Who can enter into his soul? Every man must help himself. You won't believe me, perhaps. I lie here sometimes so alone, and it's as though there were no one else in the world but me, as if I alone were living. And it seems to me as though something were blessing me. I'm carried away by dreams that are really marvelous."
"What do you dream of then, Lukerya?"
"That too, master, I couldn't say. One can't explain. Besides, one forgets afterwards. It's like a cloud coming over and bursting. Then it grows so fresh and sweet. But just what it was, there is no knowing. Only my idea is, if folks were near me, I should have nothing of that, and should feel nothing except my misfortune."
Lukerya heaved a painful sigh. Her breathing, like her limbs, was not under her control.
"When I come to think, master, of you," she began again, "you are very sorry for me. But you mustn't be too sorry, really. I'll tell you one thing. For instance, I sometimes, even now, do you remember how merry I used to be in my time? A regular madcap. So do you know what? I sing songs even now."
"Sing? You?"
"Yes, I sing the old songs, songs for choruses, for feasts, Christmas songs, all sorts. I know such a lot of them, you see, and I've not forgotten them. Only dance songs I don't sing. In my state now, it wouldn't suit me."
"How do you sing them? To yourself?"
"To myself, yes, and aloud too. I can't sing loud, but still one can understand it. I told you a little girl waits on me, a clever little orphan she is. So I have taught her 4 songs she has learned from me already. Don't you believe me? Wait a minute, I'll show you directly."
Lukerya took breath. The thought that this half-dead creature was making ready to begin singing raised an involuntary feeling of dread in me. But before I could utter a word, a long drawn-out, hardly audible, but pure and true note was quivering in my ears. It was followed by a second and a third. "In the meadows," sang Lukerya. She sang, the expression of her stony face unchanged, even her eyes riveted on one spot. But how touchingly tinkled out that poor struggling little voice, that wavered like a thread of smoke! How she longed to pour out all her soul in it! I felt no dread now, my heart throbbed with unutterable pity.
"Ah, I can't," she said suddenly. "I've not the strength. I'm so upset with joy at seeing you."
She closed her eyes. I laid my hand on her tiny chill fingers. She glanced at me, and her dark lids, fringed with golden eyelashes, closed again, and were still as an ancient statue's. An instant later they glistened in the half-darkness. They were moistened by a tear. As before, I did not stir.
"How silly I am,"
said Lukerya suddenly with unexpected force, and opened her eyes wide. She tried to wink the tears out of them.
"I ought to be ashamed. What am I doing? It's a long time since I have been like this. Not since that day when Vasya Polyakov was here last spring. While he sat with me and talked, I was all right. But when he had gone away, how I did cry in my loneliness. Where did I get the tears from? But there, we girls get our tears for nothing. Master," added Lukerya, "perhaps you have a handkerchief? If you won't mind, wipe my eyes."
I made haste to carry out her desire, and left her the handkerchief. She refused it at first.
"What good's such a gift to me?"
she said. The handkerchief was plain enough, but clean and white. Afterwards she clutched it in her weak fingers, and did not loosen them again. As I got used to the darkness in which we both were, I could clearly make out her features, could even perceive the delicate flush that peeped out under the coppery hue of her face, could discover in the face, so at least it seemed to me, traces of its former beauty. "You asked me, master," Lukerya began again, "whether I sleep. I sleep very little, but every time I fall asleep I've dreams, such splendid dreams. I am never ill in my dreams. I'm always so well and young. There's one thing's sad. I wake up and long for a good stretch, and I am all as if I were in chains. I once had such an exquisite dream. Shall I tell it to you? Well, listen. I dreamt I was standing in a meadow, and all round me was rye, so tall and ripe as gold. And I had a reddish dog with me, such a wicked dog. It kept trying to bite me. And I had a sickle in my hands, not a simple sickle. It seemed to be the moon itself, the moon as it is when it's the shape of a sickle. And with this same moon I had to cut the rye clean. Only I was very weary with the heat, and the moon blinded me, and I felt lazy. And cornflowers were growing all about, and such big ones, and they all turned their heads to me. And I thought in my dream I would pick them. Vasia had promised to come, so I'd pick myself a wreath first. I'd still time to plait it. I began picking cornflowers, but they kept melting away from between my fingers, do what I would. And I couldn't make myself a wreath. And meanwhile I heard someone coming up to me so close and calling, "Lusha, Lusha." Ah, I thought, what a pity I hadn't time. No matter, I put that moon on my head instead of cornflowers. I put it on like a tiara, and I was all brightness directly. I made the whole field light around me, and behold, over the very top of the ears there came gliding very quickly towards me, not Vasia, but Christ himself. And how I knew it was Christ I can't say. They don't paint him like that. Only it was he. No beard, tall, young, all in white. Only his belt was golden, and he held out his hand to me. "Fear not," said he, "my bride adorned, follow me. You shall lead the choral dance in the heavenly kingdom and sing the songs of paradise." And how I clung to his hand! My dog at once followed at my heels, but then we began to float upwards. He in front, his wings spread wide over all the sky, long like a seagull's, and I after him, and my dog had to stay behind. Then only I understood that that dog was my illness, and that in the heavenly kingdom there was no place for it.
Lukerya paused a minute.
"And I had another dream too," she began again. "But maybe it was a vision? I really don't know. It seemed to me I was lying in this very shanty, and my dead parents, father and mother, come to me and bow low to me, but say nothing. And I asked them, 'Why do you bow down to me, father and mother?' 'Because,' they said, 'you suffer much in this world, so that you have not only set free your own soul, but have taken a great burden from off us too. And for us in the other world it is much easier. You have made an end of your own sins. Now you are expiating our sins.' And having said this, my parents bowed down to me again, and I could not see them. There was nothing but the walls to be seen. I was in great doubt afterwards what had happened with me. I even told the priest of it in confession. Only he thinks it was not a vision, because visions come only to the clerical gentry.
And I'll tell you another dream," Lukerya went on. "I dreamt I was sitting on the high road under a willow. I had a stick, had a wallet on my shoulders, and my head tied up in a kerchief, just like a pilgrim woman. And I had to go somewhere, a long, long way off, on a pilgrimage. And pilgrims kept coming past me. They came along slowly, all going one way. Their faces were weary and all very much like one another. And I dreamt that moving about among them was a woman, a head taller than the rest, and wearing a peculiar dress, not like ours, not Russian. And her face too was peculiar, a worn face and severe. And all the others moved away from her. But she suddenly turns and comes straight to me. She stood still and looked at me, and her eyes were yellow, large, and clear as a falcon's. And I asked her, 'Who are you?' And she says to me, 'I'm your death.' Instead of being frightened, I was quite the other way. I was as pleased as could be. I crossed myself, and the woman, my death, says to me, 'I am sorry for you, Lukerya, but I can't take you with me. Farewell.' Good God, how sad I was then! 'Take me,' said I. 'Good mother, take me, darling.' And my death turned to me and began speaking to me. I knew that she was appointing me my hour, but indistinctly, incomprehensibly. 'After St. Peter's Day,' said she. With that I awoke. Yes, I have such wonderful dreams." Lukerya turned her eyes upwards and sank into thought. "Only the sad thing is, sometimes a whole week will go by without my getting to sleep once. Last year a lady came to see me, and she gave me a little bottle of medicine against sleeplessness. She told me to take 10 drops at a time. It did me so much good, and I used to sleep, only the bottle was all finished long ago. Do you know what medicine that was and how to get it?" The lady had obviously given Lukerya opium. I promised to get her another bottle like it, and could not refrain from again wondering aloud at her patience. "Ah, master," she answered, "why do you say so? What do you mean by patience? There Simon Stylites now had patience, certainly, great patience. For 30 years he stood on a pillar. And another saint had himself buried in the earth, right up to his breast, and the ants ate his face. And I'll tell you what I was told by a good scholar. There was once a country, and the Ishmaelites made war on it, and they tortured and killed all the inhabitants. And do what they would, the people could not get rid of them. And there appeared among these people a holy virgin. She took a great sword, put on armor weighing 80 pounds, went out against the Ishmaelites, and drove them all beyond the sea. Only when she had driven them out, she said to them, 'Now burn me, for that was my vow, that I would die a death by fire for my people.' And the Ishmaelites took her and burned her, and the people have been free ever since then. That was a noble deed now. But what am I?" I wondered myself whence and in what shape the legend of Joan of Arc had reached her, and after a brief silence I asked Lukerya how old she was. 28 or 9, it won't be 30. But why count the years? I've something else to tell you." Lukerya suddenly gave a sort of choked cough and groaned. "You are talking a great deal," I observed to her. "It may be bad for you." "It's true," she whispered hardly audibly. It's time to end our talk. But what does it matter? Now, when you leave me, I can be silent as long as I like. Anyway, I've opened my heart. I began bidding her goodbye. I repeated my promise to send her the medicine and asked her once more to think well and tell me if there wasn't anything she wanted. I want nothing. I'm content with all, thank God, she articulated with very great effort but with emotion. God give good health to all. But there, master, you might speak a word to your mamma. The peasants here are poor. If she could take the least bit off their rent. They've not land enough and no advantages. They would pray to God for you. But I want nothing. I'm quite contented with all. I gave Lukerya my word that I would carry out her request, and had already walked to the door. She called me back again. Do you remember, master? She said, and there was a gleam of something wonderful in her eyes and on her lips. What hair I used to have. Do you remember? Right down to my knees. It was long before I could make up my mind to it. Such hair as it was. But how could it be kept combed in my state? So I had it cut off. Yes. Well, goodbye, master. I can't talk any more. That day, before setting off to shoot, I had a conversation with the village constable about Lukerya. I learned from him that in the village they called Lukerya the living relic. That she gave them no trouble, however. They never heard complaint or repining from her. She asks nothing, but on the contrary she is grateful for everything, a gentle soul, one must say, if any there be. Stricken of God, so the constable concluded. For her sins, one must suppose, but we do not go into that. And as for judging her, no. No, we do not judge her. Let her be. A few weeks later I heard that Lukerya was dead. So her death had come for her, and after St. Peter's Day. They told me that on the day of her death she kept hearing the sound of bells, though it was reckoned over 5 miles from Alexeyevka to the church, and it was a weekday. Lukerya, however, had said that the sounds came not from the church, but from above. Probably she did not dare to say from heaven. End of A Living Relic. Chapter 24 of A Sportsman's Sketches. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tovarisch. A Sportsman's Sketches by Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance GARNETT. The Rattling of Wheels. "I've something to tell you," observed Yermolai, coming into the hut to see me. I had just had dinner, and was lying down on a travelling bed to rest a little after a fairly successful but fatiguing day of grouse shooting. It was somewhere about the 10th of July, and the heat was terrific. "I've something to tell you. All our shots gone." I jumped off the bed. "All gone? How's that?" "Why, we took pretty nearly 30 pounds with us from the village, a whole bag." "That's so, and a big bag it was, enough for a fortnight. But there's no knowing. There must have been a hole coming it or something. Anyway, there's no shot. That's to say, there's enough for 10 charges left." "What are we to do now? The very best places are before us. We're promised 6 coveys for tomorrow." "Well, send me to Tula. It's not so far from here, only 40 miles. I'll fly like the wind, and bring 40 pounds of shot if you say the word." "But when would you go?" "Why, directly. Why put it off? Only I say we shall have to hire horses." "Why hire horses? Why not our own?" We can't drive there with our own. The shaft horse has gone lame, terribly." "Since when's that?" "Well, the other day the coachman took him to be shod. So he was shod, and the blacksmith, I suppose, was clumsy. Now he can't even step on the hoof. It's a front leg. He lifts it up, like a dog." "Well, they've taken the shoe off, I suppose, at least." "No, they've not. But of course they ought to take it off. A nail's been driven right into the flesh, I should say." I ordered the coachman to be summoned. It turned out that Ermolai had spoken the truth. The shaft horse really could not put its hoof to the ground. I promptly gave orders for it to have the shoe taken off and to be stood on damp clay. "Then do you wish me to hire horses to go to Tula?" Ermolai persisted. "Do you suppose we can get horses in this wilderness?" I exclaimed with involuntary irritation. The village in which we found ourselves was a desolate, God-forsaken place. All its inhabitants seemed to be poverty-stricken. We had difficulty in discovering one hut, moderately roomy, and even that one had no chimney. "Yes," replied Ermolai with his habitual equanimity. "What you said about this village is true enough, but there used to be living in this very place one peasant, a very clever fellow. Rich, too. He had 9 horses. He's dead. And his eldest son manages it all now. The man's a perfect fool, but still he's not had time to waste his father's wealth yet. We can get horses from him. If you say the word, I will fetch 'em. His brothers, I've heard say, are smart chaps. But still, he's their head." "Why so?" "Because he is the eldest. Of course, the younger ones must obey." Here Ermolai, in reference to younger brothers as a class, expressed himself with a vigour quite unsuitable for print. "I'll fetch him. He's a simple fellow. With him you can't fail to come to terms." While Ermolai went after his simple fellow, the idea occurred to me that it might be better for me to drive into Tula myself. In the first place, taught by experience, I had no very great confidence in Ermolai. I had once sent him to the town for purchases. He had promised to get through all my commissions in one day, and was gone a whole week, drank up all the money, and came back on foot, though he had set off in my racing droshky. And secondly, I had an acquaintance in Tula, a horse dealer. I might buy a horse off him to take the place of the disabled shaft horse. The thing is decided, I thought. I'll drive over myself. I can sleep just as well on the road. Luckily the coach is comfortable. "I've brought him!" cried Ermolai, rushing into the hut a quarter of an hour later. He was followed by a tall peasant in a white shirt, blue breeches, and bast shoes, with white eyebrows and short-sighted eyes, a wedge-shaped red beard, a long swollen nose, and a gaping mouth. He certainly did look simple. "Here, your honour," observed Ermolai, "he has horses, and he's willing." "So be surely I—" the peasant began hesitatingly in a rather hoarse voice, shaking his thin wisps of hair and drumming with his fingers on the band of the cap he held in his hands. "Surely I—" "What's your name?" I inquired. The peasant looked down and seemed to think deeply. "My name?" "Yes. What are you called?" "Why, my name'll be Philofey." "Well then, friend Philofey, I hear you have horses. Bring a team of 3 here, we'll put them in my coach, it's a light one, and you'll drive me in to Tula. There's a moon now at night, it's light, and it's cool for driving. What sort of a road have you here?" "The road? There's naught amiss with the road. To the main road it will be 16 miles, not more. There's one little place, a bit awkward, but not amiss else."
What sort of little place is it that's awkward?
Well, we'll have to cross the river by the ford. But are you thinking of going to Tula yourself? Inquired Yermolai.
Yes. Oh, commented my faithful servant with a shake of his head. Oh, he repeated, then he spat on the floor and walked out of the room. The expedition to Tula obviously no longer presented any features of interest to him. It had become for him a dull and unattractive business. Do you know the road well? I said, addressing Filofey.
Surely, we know the road. Only, so to say, please your honor, can't, so on the sudden, so to say.
It appeared that Yermolai, on engaging Filofey, had stated that he could be sure that, fool as he was, he'd be paid, and nothing more. Filofey, fool as he was, in Yermolai's words, was not satisfied with this statement alone. He demanded of me 50 rubles, an exorbitant price. I offered him 10, a low price. We fell to haggling. Filofey at first was stubborn, then he began to calm down, but slowly. Yermolai, entering for an instant, began assuring me,
"That fool, he is fond of the words, seemingly,"
Filofey remarked it in a low voice,
"that fool can't reckon money at all,"
and reminded me how 20 years ago a posting tavern, established by my mother at the crossing of two high roads, came to complete grief from the fact that the old house serf who was put there to manage it positively did not understand reckoning money, but valued sums simply by the number of coins, in fact gave silver coins in change for copper, though he would swear furiously all the time.
"Ah, you Filofey, you're a regular Filofey,"
Yermolai jeered at last, and he went out slamming the door angrily. Filofey made him no reply, as though admitting that to be called Filofey was, as a fact, not very clever of him, and that a man might fairly be reproached for such a name, though really it was the village priest was to blame in the matter for not having done better by him at his christening. At last we agreed, however, on the sum of 20 rubles. He went off for the horses, and an hour later brought 5 to me to choose from. The horses turned out to be fairly good, though their manes and tails were tangled and their bellies round and taut as drums. With Filofey came 2 of his brothers, not in the least like him. Little, black-eyed, sharp-nosed fellows, they certainly produced the impression of smart chaps. They talked a great deal very fast, clacked away, as Yermolai expressed it, but obeyed the elder brother. They dragged the coach out of the shed and were busy about it and the horses for an hour and a half. First they let out the traces, which were of cord, then pulled them too tight again. Both brothers were very much set on harnessing the roan in the shafts, because "him can do best going downhill." But Filofey decided for the shaggy one. So the shaggy one was put in the shafts accordingly. They heaped the coach up with hay, put the collar of the lame shaft horse under the seat in case we might want to fit it on to the horse to be bought at Tula. Filofey, who had managed to run home and come back in a long, white, loose, ancestral overcoat, a high sugarloaf cap, and tarred boots, clambered triumphantly up onto the box. I took my seat looking at my watch. It was 10:15. Yermolai did not even say good-bye to me. He was engaged in beating his valetka. Filofey tugged at the reins and shouted in a thin voice, "Hey, you little ones!" His brothers skipped away on both sides, lashed the trace horses under the belly, and the coach started, turned out of the gates into the street. The shaggy one tried to turn off towards his own home, but Filofey brought him to reason with a few strokes of the whip, and behold, we were already out of the village and rolling along a fairly even road between close-growing bushes of thick hazels.
It was a still, glorious night, the very nicest for driving. A breeze rustled now and then in the bushes, set the twigs swinging, and died away again. In the sky could be seen motionless silvery clouds. The moon stood high and threw a bright light on all around. I stretched myself on the hay and was just beginning to doze. But I remembered the awkward place and started up. "I say, Filafey, is it far to the ford?"
To the ford, it'll be near upon 7 miles.
7 miles, I mused. We shan't get there for another hour. I can have a nap meanwhile. "Filafey, do you know the road well?" I asked again.
"Surely. How could I fail to know it? It's not the first time I've driven."
He said something more, but I had ceased to listen. I was asleep. I was awakened not, as often happens, by my own intention of waking in exactly an hour, but by a sort of strange, though faint, lapping, gurgling sound at my very ear. I raised my head. Wonderful to relate! I was lying in the coach as before, but all round the coach, half a foot not more from its edge, a sheet of water lay shining in the moonlight, broken up into tiny distinct quivering eddies. I looked in front. On the box, with back bowed and head bent, Filafey was sitting like a statue, and a little further on, above the rippling water, I saw the curved arch of the yoke and the horses' heads and backs, and everything as motionless, as noiseless, as though in some enchanted realm, in a dream of fairyland. What does it mean? I looked back from under the hood of the coach. Why, we are in the middle of the river. The bank was 30 paces from us. "Filafey!" I cried.
"What?"
he answered. "What indeed? Upon my word! Where are we?"
"In the river."
"I see we're in the river, but like this we shall be drowned directly. Is this how you cross the ford, eh? Why, you're asleep, Filafey. Answer, do."
"I've made a little mistake,"
observed my guide.
"I've gone to one side a bit wrong, but now we've got to wait a bit."
"Got to wait a bit? Whatever are we going to wait for?"
"Well, we must let the shaggy one look about him. Which way he turns his head, that way we've got to go."
I raised myself on the hay. The shaft horse's head stood quite motionless. Above the head one could only see, in the bright moonlight, one ear slightly twitching backwards and forwards. "Why, he's asleep too, your shaggy one."
"No,"
responded Filafey,
"he's sniffing the water now."
And everything was still again. There was only the faint gurgle of the water as before. I sank into a state of torpor. Moonlight and night and the river and we in it. "What is that croaking noise?" I asked Filafey.
"That? Ducks in the reeds, or else snakes."
All of a sudden the head of the shaft horse shook, his ears pricked up, he gave a snort, began to move.
"Ho, ho, ho, ho!"
Filafey began suddenly bawling at the top of his voice. He sat up and brandished the whip. The coach was at once tugged away from where it had stuck. It plunged forward, cleaving the waters of the river, and moved along, swaying and lurching from side to side. At first it seemed to me we were sinking, getting deeper. However, after 2 or 3 tugs and jolts, the expanse of water seemed suddenly lower. It got lower and lower, the coach seemed to grow up out of it, and now the wheels and the horses' tails could be seen, and now stirring with a mighty splashing of big drops, scattering showers of diamonds, no, not diamonds,
sapphires in the dull brilliance of the moon, the horses with a spirited pull all together drew us on to the sandy bank and trotted along the road to the hillside, their shining white legs flashing in rivalry. What will Philofay say now? Was the thought that glanced through my mind. You see, I was right, or something of that sort. But he said nothing. So I too did not think it necessary to reproach him for carelessness, and lying down in the hay I tried again to go to sleep. But I could not go to sleep, not because I was not tired from hunting, and not because the exciting experience I had just been through had dispelled my sleepiness. It was that we were driving through such very beautiful country. There were liberal, wide-stretching, grassy riverside meadows with a multitude of small pools, little lakes, rivulets, creeks overgrown at the ends with branches and osiers, a regular Russian scene, such as Russians love, like the scenes amid which the heroes of our old legends rode out to shoot white swans and great ducks. The road we were driven along wound in a yellowish ribbon, the horses ran lightly, and I could not close my eyes. I was admiring, and it all floated by, softened into harmony under the kindly light of the moon. Philofay, he too, was touched by it. "Those meadows are called St. Yegor's," he said, turning to me. "And beyond them come the Grand Dukes. There are no other meadows like them in all Russia. Ah, it's lovely." The shaft horse snorted and shook itself. "God bless you," commented Philofay gravely in an undertone. "How lovely," he repeated with a sigh. Then he gave a long sort of grunt. "Their mowing time is just upon us, and think what hay they'll rake up there. Regular mountains. And there are lots of fish in the creeks. Such bream," he added in a sing-song voice. "In one word, life's sweet. One doesn't want to die." He suddenly raised his hand. "Hallo! Looky! Over the lake. Is it a crane standing there? Can it be fishing at night? Bless me, it's a branch, not a crane. Well, that was a mistake. But the moon is always so deceptive." So we drove on and on, but now the end of the meadows had been reached, little copses and ploughed fields came into view, a little village flashed with 2 or 3 lights on one side. It was only 4 miles now to the main road. I fell asleep. Again I did not wake up of my own accord. This time I was roused by the voice of Philofay. "Master! Hey, master!" I sat up. The coach was standing still on level ground in the very middle of the high road. Philofay, who had turned round on the box so as to face me with wide open eyes, I was positively surprised at them, I couldn't have imagined he had such large eyes, was whispering with mysterious significance. A rattle of wheels." "What do you say?" "I say there is a rattling. Bend down and listen. Do you hear it?" I put my head out of the coach, held my breath, and did catch somewhere in the distance far behind us a faint broken sound as of wheels rolling. "Do you hear it?" repeated Philofay. "Well, yes," I answered. "Some vehicle is coming." "Oh, you don't hear. Shoo! The tambourines and whistling too. Do you hear? Take off your cap. You will hear better." I didn't take off my cap, but I listened. "Well, yes, perhaps. But what of it?" Philofay turned round facing the horses. "It's a cart coming. Lightly, iron-rimmed wheels.
he observed, and he took up the reins.
"It's wicked folks coming, master. Hereabouts, you know, near Tula, they play a good many tricks."
"What nonsense! What makes you suppose it's sure to be wicked people?"
"I speak the truth. With tambourines, and in an empty cart. Who should it be?"
"Well, is it much further to Tula?"
"There's 12 miles further to go, and not a habitation here."
"Well, then, get on quicker. It's no good lingering." Filofey brandished the whip, and the coach rolled on again. Though I did not put much faith in Filofey, I could not go to sleep. What if it really is so? A disagreeable sensation began to stir in me. I sat up in the coach, till then I had lain down, and began looking in all directions. While I had been asleep, a slight fog had come over, not the earth, but the sky. It stood high, the moon hung in a whitish patch in it, as though in smoke. Everything had grown dim and blended together, though it was clearer near the ground. Around us, flat, dreary country, fields, nothing but fields, here and there bushes and ravines, and again fields mostly fallow, with scanty dusty grass, a wilderness, death-like. If only a quail had called. We drove on for half an hour. Filofey kept constantly cracking his whip and clicking with his lips, but neither he nor I uttered a word. So we mounted the hillside. Filofey pulled up the horses and promptly said again, "It's a rattle of wheels, master, yes it is." I poked my head out of the coach again, but I might have stayed under the cover of the hood, so distinctly, though still from a distance, the sound reached me of cart-wheels, men whistling, the jingling of tambourines, and even the thud of horses' hoofs. I even fancied I could hear singing and laughter. The wind, it is true, was blowing from there, but there was no doubt that the unknown travellers were a good mile, perhaps 2, nearer us. Filofey and I looked at one another. He only gave his hat a tweak forward from behind, and at once, bending over the reins, fell to whipping up the horses. They set off at a gallop, but they could not gallop for long, and fell back into a trot again. Filofey continued to whip them. We must get away. I can't account for the fact that though I had not at first shared Filofey's apprehensions, about this time I suddenly gained the conviction that we really were being followed by highwaymen. I had heard nothing new. The same tambourines, the same rattle of a cart without a load, the same intermittent whistling, the same confused uproar. But now I had no doubt Filofey could not have made a mistake. And now 20 minutes more had gone by. During the last of these 20 minutes, even through the clatter and rumble of our own carriage, we could hear another clatter and another rumbling. "Stop, Filofey," I said. "It's no use. The end's the same." Filofey uttered a faint-hearted woo. The horses instantaneously stopped, as though delighted at the chance of resting. Mercy upon us! The tambourines were simply booming away just behind our backs, the cart was rattling and creaking, the men were whistling, shouting and singing, the horses were snorting and thumping on the ground with their hoofs. They had overtaken us.
"Bad luck,"
Filofey commented in an emphatic undertone, and, clicking to the horses irresolutely, he began to urge them on again. But at that very instant there was a sort of sudden Russian whiz, and a very big wide cart, harnessed with 3 lean horses, cut sharply at a rush up to us, galloped in front, and at once fell into a walking pace, blocking up the road.
"A regular brigand's trick,"
murmured Filofey. I must own I felt a cold chill at my heart. I fell to staring before me with strained attention in the half-darkness of the misty moonlight. In the cart in front of us were, half lying, half sitting, 6 men in shirts and in unbuttoned rough overcoats. 2 of them had no caps on. Huge feet in boots were swinging and hanging over the cart rail. Arms were rising and falling helter-skelter. Bodies were jolting backwards and forwards. It was quite clear, a drunken party. Some were bawling at random. One was whistling very correctly and shrilly. Another was swearing. On the driver's seat sat a sort of giant in a cape, driving. They went at a walking pace, as though paying no attention to us. What was to be done? We followed them also at a walking pace. We could do nothing else. For a quarter of a mile we moved along in this manner. The suspense was torturing. To protect, to defend ourselves was out of the question. There were 6 of them, and I hadn't even a stick. Should we turn back? But they would catch us up directly. I remembered the line of Zhukovsky in a passage where he speaks of the murder of Field Marshal Kamensky. The scoundrel highwayman's vile axe. Or else strangling with filthy cord, flung into a ditch, there to choke and struggle like a hare in a trap. Ah, it was horrid. And they, as before, went on at a walking pace, taking no notice of us. "Filafey," I whispered, "just try keep more to the right, see if you can get by." Filafey tried, kept to the right, but they promptly kept to the right too. It was impossible to get by. Filafey made another effort, he kept to the left, but there again they did not let him pass the cart. They even laughed aloud. That meant that they wouldn't let us pass. "Then they are a bad lot," Filafey whispered to me over his shoulder. "But what are they waiting for?" I inquired also in a whisper. "To reach the bridge, over there in front, in the hollow, above the stream. They'll do for us there. That's always their way, by bridges. It's a clear case for us, master." He added with a sigh, "They'll hardly let us go alive, for the great thing for them is to keep it all dark. I am sorry for one thing, master. My horses are lost, and my brothers won't get them." I should have been surprised at the time that Filafey could still trouble about his horses at such a moment, but I must confess I had no thoughts for him. Will they really kill me? I kept repeating mentally. Why should they? I'll give them everything I have. And the bridge was getting nearer and nearer. It could be more and more clearly seen. Suddenly a sharp whoop was heard. The cart before us, as it were, flew ahead, dashed along, and reaching the bridge at once stopped stock still a little on one side of the road. My heart fairly sank like lead. "Ah, brother Filafey," I said, "we are going to our death. Forgive me for bringing you to ruin." "As though it were your fault, master. There's no escaping one's fate. Come, Shaggy, my trusty little horse," Filafey addressed the shaft horse. "Step on, brother. Do your last bit of service, it's all the same." And he urged his horses into a trot. We began to get near the bridge, near that motionless, menacing cart. In it everything was silent, as though on purpose. Not a single halloo. It was the stillness of the pike, or the hawk, of every beast of prey as its victim approaches. And now we were level with the cart. Suddenly the giant in the cape sprang out of the cart and came straight towards us. He said nothing to Filafey, but the latter, of his own accord, tugged at the reins. The coach stopped. The giant laid both arms on the carriage door, and bending forward his shaggy head with a grin, he uttered the following speech in a soft, even voice, with the accent of a factory hand.
"Honored sir, we're coming from an honest feast, from a wedding. We've been marrying one of our fine fellows, that is, we've put him to bed. We're all young lads, reckless chaps. There's been a good deal of drinking and nothing to sober us. So wouldn't your honour be so good as to favour us the least little, just for a dram of brandy for our mate? We'd drink to your health and remember your worship. But if you won't be gracious to us, well, we beg you not to be angry."
What's the meaning of this, I thought. A joke? A jeer? The giant continued to stand with bent head. At that very instant the moon emerged from the fog and lighted up his face. There was a grin on the face, in the eyes and on the lips, but there was nothing threatening to be seen in it. Only it seemed, as it were, all on the alert, and the teeth were so white and large. "I shall be pleased. Take this," I said hurriedly, and pulling my purse out of my pocket, I took out 2 silver roubles. At that time silver was still circulating in Russia. "Here, if that's enough." "Much obliged," bawled the giant in military fashion, and his fat fingers in a flash snatched from me, not the whole purse, but only the 2 roubles. "Much obliged." He shook his hair back and ran up to the cart. "Lads," he shouted, "the gentleman makes us a present of 2 silver roubles." They all began, as it were, gabbling at once. The giant rolled up on to the driver's seat. "Good luck to you, master!" And that was the last we saw of them. The horses dashed on, the cart rumbled up the hill. Once more it stood out on the dark line separating the earth from the sky, went down, and vanished. And now the rattle of the wheels, the shouts and tambourines could not be heard. There was a death-like silence. Filofey and I could not recover ourselves all at once.
"Ah, you're a merry fellow,"
he commented at last, and taking off his hat he began crossing himself.
"Fond of a joke, on my word,"
he added, and he turned to me beaming all over.
"But he must be a capital fellow, on my word. Now, little ones, look alive. You're safe. We're all safe. It was he who wouldn't let us get by. It was he who drove the horses. What a chap for a joke. Now, get on in God's name."
I did not speak, but I felt happy too. "We are safe," I repeated to myself, and lay down on the hay. "We've got off cheap." I even felt rather ashamed that I had remembered that line of Zhukovsky's. Suddenly an idea occurred to me. "Filofey?"
"What is it?"
"Are you married?"
"Yes."
"And have you children?"
"Yes."
"How was it you didn't think of them? You were sorry for your horses. Weren't you sorry for your wife and children?"
"Why be sorry for them? They weren't going to fall into the hands of thieves, you know. But I kept them in my mind all the while, and I do now, surely."
Filofey paused.
"Maybe it was for their sake Almighty God had mercy on us."
"But if they weren't highwaymen?"
"How can we tell? Can one creep into the soul of another? Another soul, we know, is a dark place. But with the thought of God in the heart, things are always better. Oh, no. I'd my family all the time. Gee up! Little ones, in God's name!"
It was already almost daylight. We began to drive into Tula. I was lying dreamy and half asleep.
"Master,"
Filofey said to me suddenly,
"look! They're stopping at the tavern. Their cart."
I raised my head. There they were, and their cart and horses. In the doorway of the drinking house there suddenly appeared our friend the giant in the cape.
"Sir,"
he shouted, waving his cap. "We're drinking your health! Hey, coachman!" he added, wagging his head at Filofey. "You were a bit scared? I shouldn't wonder, hey?" "A merry fellow," observed Filofey when we had driven nearly 50 yards from the tavern. We got into Tula at last. I bought shot, and while I was about it, tea and spirits, and even got a horse from the horse dealer. At midday we set off home again. As we drove by the place where we first heard the rattle of the cart behind us, Filofey, who having had something to drink at Tula, turned out to be very talkative. He even began telling me fairy tales. As he passed the place, suddenly burst out laughing. "Do you remember, master, how I kept saying to you, a rattle of wheels, I said?" He waved his hand several times. This expression struck him as most amusing. The same evening we got back to his village. I related the adventure that had befallen us to Ermolai. Being sober, he expressed no sympathy. He only gave a grunt. Whether of approval or reproach, I imagine he did not know himself. But 2 days later he informed me, with great satisfaction, that the very night Filofey and I had been driving to Tula, and on the very road, a merchant had been robbed and murdered. I did not at first put much faith in it, but later on I was obliged to believe it. It was confirmed by the police captain, who came galloping over in consequence. Was not that perhaps the wedding our brave spirits were returning from? Wasn't that the fine fellow they had put to bed, in the words of the jocose giant? I stayed 5 days longer in Filofey's village. Whenever I met him, I always said to him, "A rattle of wheels, eh?" "A merry fellow," he always answers, and bursts out laughing. End of the Rattling of Wheels. Epilogue of A Sportsman's Sketches. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by tovarisch. A Sportsman's Sketches by Ivan Turgenev. Translated by Constance GARNETT. The Forest and the Steppe. And slowly something began to draw him back to the country, to the garden dark, where lime trees are so huge, so full of shade, and lilies of the valley, sweet as maids, where rounded willows o'er the water's edge lean from the dike in rows, and where the oak sturdily grows above the sturdy field, amid the smell of hemp and nettles rank, there, in meadows stretching wide, where rich and black as velvet is the earth, where the sweet rye, far as the eye can see, move noiselessly in tender billowing waves, and where the heavy golden light is shed from out of rounded white transparent clouds, there it is good. From a poem devoted to the flames. The reader is very likely already weary of my sketches. I hasten to reassure him by promising to confine myself to the fragments already printed. But I cannot refrain from saying a few words at parting about a sportsman's life. Hunting with a dog and a gun is delightful in itself, für sich, as they used to say in old days, but let us suppose you were not born a sportsman, but are fond of nature all the same. You cannot then help envying us sportsmen. Listen. Do you know, for instance, the delight of setting off before daybreak in spring? You come out onto the steppes, in the dark grey sky, stars are twinkling here and there, a damp breeze in faint gusts flies to meet you now and then, There is heard the secret vague whispering of the night. The trees faintly rustle, wrapped in darkness, and now they pull the hood over the cart and lay a box with the samovar at your feet. The trace horses move restlessly, snort, and daintily paw the ground. A couple of white geese, only just awake, waddle slowly and silently across the road. On the other side of the hedge in the garden the watchman is snoring peacefully. Every sound seems to stand still in the frozen air, suspended, not moving. You take your seat, the horses start at once, the cart rolls off with a loud rumble. You drive past the church, downhill to the right, across the dike. The pond is just beginning to be covered with mist. You are rather chilly. You cover your face with the collar of your fur cloak. You doze. The horse's hoofs splash sonorously through the puddles. The coachman begins to whistle. But by now you have driven over 3 miles. The rim of the sky flushes crimson. The jackdaws are heard, fluttering clumsily in the birch trees. Sparrows are twittering about the dark hayricks. The air is clearer, the road more distinct, the sky brightens, the clouds look whiter, and the fields look greener. In the huts there is the red light of flaming chips. From behind gates comes the sound of sleepy voices. And meanwhile the glow of dawn is beginning. Already streaks of gold are stretching across the sky. Mists are gathering in clouds over the ravines. The larks are singing musically. The breeze that ushers in the dawn is blowing. And slowly the purple sun floats upward. There is a perfect flood of light. Your heart is fluttering like a bird. Everything is fresh, gay, delightful. One can see a long way all round. That way, beyond the copse, a village. There, further, another, with a white church. And there a birchwood on the hill. Behind it the marsh for which you are bound. Quicker, horses, quicker! Forward at a good trot. There are 3 miles to go, not more. The sun mounts swiftly higher, the sky is clear, it will be a glorious day. A herd of cattle comes straggling from the village to meet us. You go up the hill. What a view! The river winds for 10 miles, dimly blue through the mist. Beyond it, meadows of watery green. Beyond the meadows, sloping hills. In the distance, the plovers are wheeling with loud cries above the marsh. Through the moist brilliance suffused in the air, the distance stands out clearly. Not as in the summer. How freely one drinks in the air, how quickly the limbs move, how strong is the whole man clasped in the fresh breath of spring. And a summer morning, a morning in July. Who but the sportsman knows how soothing it is to wander at daybreak among the underwoods? The print of your feet lies in a green line on the grass, white with dew. You part the drenched bushes. You are met by a rush of the warm fragrance stored up in the night. The air is saturated with the fresh bitterness of wormwood, the honey sweetness of buckwheat and clover. In the distance an oak wood stands like a wall, and glows and glistens in the sun. It is still fresh, but already the approach of heat is felt. The head is faint and dizzy from the excess of sweet scents. The copse stretches on endlessly. Only in places there are yellow glimpses in the distance of ripening rye and narrow streaks of red buckwheat. Then there is the creak of cartwheels. A peasant makes his way among the bushes at a walking pace and sets his horse in the shade before the heat of the day. You greet him and turn away. The musical swish of the scythe is heard behind you. The sun rises higher and higher. The grass is speedily dry, and now it is quite sultry. 1 hour passes another. The sky grows dark over the horizon. The still air is baked with piercing heat. "Where can one get a drink here, brother?" you inquire of the mower. "Yonder in the ravines a well." Through the thick hazel bushes tangled by the clinging grass, you drop down to the bottom of the ravine. Right under the cliff a little spring is hidden. An oak bush greedily spreads out its twigs like great fingers over the water. Great silvery bubbles rise trembling from the bottom, covered with fine velvety moss. You fling yourself on the ground, you drink, but you are too lazy to stir. You are in the shade, you drink in the damp fragrance, you take your ease, while the bushes face you glowing and, as it were, turning yellow in the sun. But what is that? There is a sudden flying gust of wind. The air is astir all about you. Was not that thunder? Is it the heat thickening? Is a storm coming on? And now there is a faint flash of lightning. Ah, this is a storm. The sun is still blazing. You can still go on hunting. But the storm cloud grows, its front edge, drawn out like a long sleeve, bends over into an arch. The grass, the bushes, everything around grows dark. Make haste! Over there you think you catch sight of a hay barn. Make haste! You run there, go in. What rain! What flashes of lightning! The water drips in through some hole in the thatch roof onto the sweet-smelling hay. But now the sun is shining bright again. The storm is over. You come out. My God, the joyous sparkle of everything! The fresh, limpid air, the scent of raspberries and mushrooms. And then the evening comes on. There is the blaze of fire glowing and covering half the sky. The sun sets. The air near has a peculiar transparency as of crystal. Over the distance lies a soft, warm-looking haze. With the dew, a crimson light is shed on the fields, lately plunged in floods of limpid gold. From trees and bushes and high stacks of hay run long shadows. The sun has set. A star gleams and quivers in the fiery sea of the sunset, and now it pales. The sky grows blue. The separate shadows vanish. The air is plunged in darkness. It is time to turn homewards to the village, to the hut where you will stay the night. Shouldering your gun, you move briskly in spite of fatigue. Meanwhile the night comes on. Now you cannot see 20 paces from you. The dogs show faintly white in the dark. Over there, above the black bushes, there is a vague brightness on the horizon. What is it? A fire? No, it is the moon rising. And away below, to the right, the village lights are twinkling already. And here at last is your hut. Through the tiny window you see a table with a white cloth, a candle burning, supper. Another time you order the racing droshky to be got out and set off to the forest to shoot woodcock. It is pleasant making your way along the narrow path between two high walls of rye. The ears softly strike you in the face, the cornflowers cling round your legs, the quails call around, the horse moves along at a lazy trot. And here is the forest, all shade and silence. Graceful aspens rustle high above you, the long hanging branches of the birches scarcely stir. A mighty oak stands like a champion beside a lovely lime tree. You go along the green path streaked with shade. Great yellow flies stay suspended motionless in the sunny air and suddenly dart away. Midges hover in the cloud, bright in the shade, dark in the sun. The birds are singing peacefully. The golden little voice of the warbler sings of innocent babbling joyousness. in sweet accord with the scent of the lilies of the valley. Further, further, deeper into the forest grows more dense, an unutterable stillness falls upon the soul within. Without, too, all is still and dreamy. But now a wind has sprung up, and the treetops are booming like falling waves. Here and there, through last year's brown leaves, grow tall grasses. Funguses stand apart under their wide-brimmed heads. All at once a hare skips out. The dog scurries after it with a resounding bark. And how fair is this same forest in late autumn, when the snipe are on the wing! They do not keep in the heart of the forest, one must look for them along the outskirts. There is no wind and no sun, no light, no shade, no movement, no sound. The autumn perfume, like the perfume of wine, is diffused in the soft air. A delicate haze hangs over the yellow fields in the distance. The still sky is a peacefully untroubled white through the bare brown branches. In parts on the limes hang the last golden leaves. The damp earth is elastic under your feet. The high dry blades of grass do not stir. Long threads lie shining on the blanched turf, white with dew. You breathe tranquilly, but there is a strange tremor in the soul. You walk along the forest's edge, look after your dog, and meanwhile loved forms, loved faces, dead and living, come to your mind. Long, long slumbering impressions unexpectedly awaken. The fancy darts off and soars like a bird, and all moves so clearly, and stands out before your eyes. The heart at one time throbs and beats, plunging passionately forward, at another it is drowned beyond recall in memories. Your whole life, as it were, unrolls lightly and rapidly before you. A man at such times possesses all his past, all his feelings and his powers, all his soul, and there is nothing around to hinder him, no sun, no wind, no sound. And a clear, rather cold autumn day, with a frost in the morning, when the birch, all golden like some tree in a fairy tale, stands out picturesquely against the pale blue sky, when the sun, standing low in the sky, does not warm, but shines more brightly than in summer, the small aspen copse is all a-sparkle through and through, as though it were glad and at ease in its nakedness. The hoar-frost is still white at the bottom of the hollows, while the fresh wind softly stirs up and drives before it the falling, crumpled leaves, when blue ripples whisk gladly along the river, lifting rhythmically the heedless geese and ducks. In the distance the mill creaks, half hidden by the willows, and with changing colors in the clear air the pigeons wheel in swift circles above it. Sweet, too, are dull days in summer, though the sportsmen do not like them. On such days one can't shoot the bird that flutters up from under your very feet and vanishes at once in the whitish dark of the hanging fog. But how peaceful, how unutterably peaceful it is everywhere! Everything is awake and everything is hushed. You pass by a tree, it does not stir a leaf. It is musing in repose. Through the thin steamy mist evenly diffused in the air, there is a long streak of black before you. You take it for a neighboring copse close at hand. You go up, the copse is transformed into a high row of wormwood in the boundary ditch. Above you, around you, on all sides, mist. But now a breeze is faintly astir, a patch of pale blue sky peeps dimly out. Through the thinning, as it were, smoky mist, a ray of golden yellow sunshine breaks out suddenly, flows in a long stream, strikes on the fields and in the copse, and now everything is overcast again. For long this struggle is drawn out, but how unutterably brilliant and magnificent the day becomes when at last light triumphs, and the last waves of the warmed mist here unroll and are drawn out over the plains, there wind away and vanish into the deep, tenderly shining heights. Again you set off into outlying country to the steppe. For some 10 miles you make your way over crossroads, and here at last is the highroad. Past endless trains of wagons, past wayside taverns with the hissing samovar under a shed, wide open gates and a well, from one hamlet to another, across endless fields, alongside green hemp fields, a long, long time you drive. The magpies flutter from willow to willow, peasant women with long rakes in their hands wander in the fields, a man in a threadbare nankin overcoat with a wicker pannier over his shoulder trudges along with weary step. A heavy country coach, harnessed with 6 tall, broken-winded horses, rolls to meet you. The corner of a cushion is sticking out of a window, and on a sack up behind, hanging on to a string, perches a groom in a fur cloak, splashed with mud to his very eyebrows. And here is the little district town, with its crooked little wooden houses, its endless fences, its empty stone shops, its old-fashioned bridge over a deep ravine. On, on, the steppe country is reached at last. You look from a hilltop. What a view! Round low hills, tilled and sown to their very tops, are seen in broad undulations, ravines overgrown with bushes wind coiling among them, small copses are scattered like oblong islands. From village to village run narrow paths, churches stand out white, between willow bushes glimmers a little river, in 4 places dammed up by dikes, far off in a field in a line, an old manor house with its outhouses, fruit garden, and threshing floor huddles close up to a small lake. But on, you go on. The hills are smaller and ever smaller, there is scarcely a tree to be seen. Here it is at last, the boundless, untrodden steppe. And on a winter day to walk over the high snowdrifts after hares, to breathe the keen frosty air while half closing the eyes involuntarily at the fine blinding sparkle of the soft snow, to admire the emerald sky above the reddish forest, and the first spring day when everything is shining and breaking up, when across the heavy streams from the melting snow there is already the scent of the thawing earth, when on the bare thawed places under the slanting sunshine the larks are singing confidingly, and with glad splash and roar the torrents roll from ravine to ravine. But it is time to end. By the way, I have spoken of spring. In spring it is easy to part. In spring even the happy are drawn away to the distance. Farewell, reader. I wish you unbroken prosperity. End of The Forest and the Steppe. End of A Sportsman's Sketches by Ivan Turgenev, translated by Constance, GARNETT. Recording by tovarisch.